also like when he was fighting the Balrog, I love like Gandalf's line of like, I threw down my enemy and
I
smote
smote
his
his
ruin
ruin
up
on
on
the
the
mountainside. Yeah,
mountainside.
exactly.
It's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, we've all been there. Who hasn't done that?
The pulling back of Theoden to the light by Aragorn is kind of the thing that elevates him for the viewer and kind of lets us see his kingly qualities itself. In the book, obviously, he's taken on that role and is there's no reluctant hero aspect to him in the original material, but for the films, this is the first time we're seeing him kind of, okay, this is the king he will be. This is the kind of king he sees himself as needing to be.
He effectively pioneered a new style of just acting and technological, filmmaking. Say what, obviously the debate on like, is mocap acting, quote unquote, true acting is still something people discuss to this day, but
It's acting.
even so,
Yeah.
yeah, it absolutely is.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Fanalysis, Lord of the Rings. I'm Callan, this is Matt.
Hey everybody, welcome.
And this is Evan.
Greetings, everyone.
Today, talking about film number 2, book number 2 as well, I suppose, in some ways, The Two Towers. Evan, you wanted to open us a bit.
Yeah, I'm just going to open just to, quickly rip the Band-Aid off. This is my least favorite of the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy. But it's my least favorite in the same way that A New Hope is my least favorite of the original Star Wars trilogy. It's number 3 on the list just because something has to be. I still think this film is absolutely fantastic. The only reason it falls short for me compared to the other two is that I think structurally it stands, I'm going to be very careful with my words here, the least well as a standalone film, mainly because a lot of it is either wrapping up what happened in Fellowship or setting up a lot of things that come in Return of the King. It also, and I know, Matt, you've mentioned this in the past, it also has the least amount of Gandalf out of any of the trilogy, which is an objective
which is a cardinal
negative.
sin. Yep, it's an objective
Yeah,
flaw.
No
Has to
worry.
happen, but still.
I'll say this: like he's got some like really banger lines in this one. Like even for Gandalf, he's got some good ones. But he's always got good stuff as Gandalf.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
he's in like, I always forget until I actually sit down and watch this piece that he's in like 3 scenes effectively.
Yeah,
like,
significant scenes for sure. Yeah, because he's missing at for the first third-ish. He runs off to get help for the latter part. So it is a lacking compared to the first and second and third film rather.
But all that being said, this is still a fantastic film, and despite it being my least favorite of the 3, it actually has some of my favorite things. Like some of the music in this movie in particular is actually some of my favorite in the entire trilogy. In fact, the themes of Rohan and King Theoden still to this day, like that might be, I don't know if it's my favorite track out of the series, but it's definitely in my top 5, 100%. I also want to say this too, the Battle of Helm's Deep, I think that might actually be my favorite siege in the entire trilogy as well. I love the setting. I love the tension. That might change a little bit when we get into Return of the King, but right now I would say that is the case. So I just want to say, point blank, this is still an absolutely amazing experience, just like everything in this trilogy. It's just, again, something has to be number 3, and for me, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, on the point of the siege, which is obviously the climax of the film, but we'll do this in reverse order, I suppose. On the point of that, no, for sure. But that's regarded to this day pretty much as the greatest siege in cinema. I mean, even including the third film, because while obviously everything is bigger and better in scale in the Return of the King, it's not as tightly wound as Two Towers. It's not kind of as a complete piece. You're covering more material within the scope of the siege itself, rather than just the military side of things. That's kind of built. The ebb and flow of that Helm's Deep siege is absolutely fantastic from start to finish, and there are people doing many video essays on why that's the case. But yeah, am I right in saying that? I don't think off the top of my head that anything is regarded quite as well as that. For sieges.
They made a lot of epics though at the time. Like there was a lot of, there was like Troy. There was even stuff that didn't do so well was really huge in scope. Like I don't know if anyone remembers Alexander, Colin Farrell playing Alexander the Great. It flopped like a motherfucker, but I mean it's actually like a pretty like crazily well made piece. Like like a lot of the particularly the final battle featured in that is nuts. Like they have like a real elephant, like doing
Not
stuff.
an
Like so, I mean,
elephant.
it's yes.
I mean, there's also the first Chronicles of Narnia movie that had a pretty
that is a
decent
really
final
fun
battle
film.
too.
I still love that to this day.
Very underrated.
Yeah,
It
well,
hasn't really
is it
aged
though?
that well, but
It's one of those. I wouldn't have said it was aged that poorly at all, but I wouldn't have said it was
I never
underrated
think
either.
about
It kind of lost out because it was next to Lord of the Rings. It came out shortly afterwards and
yeah,
couldn't quite
it's just.
compete.
I mean,
but
it was
really good
clearly
for its
just
own
trying to
right.
like cash grab into the fantasy sort of zeitgeist that was going on at the time. But for some reason, one of the few things I still remember about that film is the final battle being decently entertaining.
It's very cool as well.
I remember nothing about that except for Tilda Swinton was excellent as
she was great.
the witch. I mean, she was fantastic. She was perfectly cast, and I think Liam Neeson was the voice of Aslan. But
Yes, Liam Neeson as Aslan is pretty iconic as well.
Oh, and also before he was like a star, James McAvoy was Mr. Tumnus.
Yes, that was one of his first big roles.
He became but I don't remember. I mean, I was never really like obsessed with the Narnia books as a kid. I think I read them a little too old. I read them like after Harry Potter, like you know what I mean. I was like, this is after I'd already gotten into stuff like that.
I've only ever read
more advanced ideas, but
ages ago, so I barely remember.
I have them all. Maybe someday I'll look at them. But yeah. Anyway, what were we talking about?
Just one other note. They're done by Weta Workshop as well. The Narnian films, which I didn't realize until I went recently.
Yeah, so, that's in my head they just don't look as good. Like in my head, but I haven't looked at them in 20 years or whenever
they're not. They weren't as good.
That. Yeah.
They weren't as good. I mean, compared to this, not even close. But as far as like the actual battle goes, like I remember that being decently entertaining. So there's a lot to compare it to. But even so, I think what makes the Helm's Deep Siege really, really powerful, is the emotionality tied to it compared to a lot of others, because the desperation of the Rohirrans and the fact that the drafting of like the old and the young people into it, the desperation of it all, the fact that also I think this is, I don't know how often this is talked about, but the fact that it's at night and it's raining, it really gives a sense of dread about what is going on. So I think when you tie all of that together, it really just makes this unbelievably, tenuous battle scene. So I think that's also what really sticks out compared to some of the stuff in Return of the King. Not that doesn't have emotionality either. It's just kind of framed a little differently.
The fact that we see it play out from start to finish as well. There's a lot more cutting away from Return of the King, both because of the scale and because of the nature of the other parts of the story that are happening simultaneously. So it's even though we do get that in the Two Towers, and I've mentioned before we started recording, one of the weird things about the finale of this film is that you are cutting from like one of the highest action pieces of the entire trilogy to one of the most intentionally boring sequences in the trilogy by nature of it being Treebeard and the old slow ents, etc. Still great stuff and really well executed, but by its nature, it's not exactly fast paced and exhilarating and keeping you intrigued the same way. It's
which
clever how they make that work.
In fairness, just to point out the writing style of Tolkien at this time, he almost never really used cross-cutting in any of his books. So it would literally it would basically go through the entirety of the Helm's Deep side of the story and then rewind back to the whole Frodo and Sam thing, which you can't really do in a film.
Yeah.
It kind of necessitates the language of cinema kind of necessitates you having to show those things simultaneously. But when you're trying to adapt something in a cross-cut manner that was never written that way in the first place, there's always going to be a little bit of awkward transition. Although in my opinion, I think this film does, for the most part, perfectly fine. It's
I mean, for my money,
there's never, even with the Treebeard stuff, I never feel like that completely kills any of the tension.
No, absolutely. It's very well handled. And like you said, structurally speaking, that's the biggest difference between the first and second and third books. And to film, I mean, in terms of adaptation, they have to splice them together in a way that just was not present for the books. Because like you say, it does just chop them up into two halves each of them, which I've never been fond of personally. I've always been curious about a slap chop combination to see where you'd have to cut each of the chapters to kind of slot them in relatively equal pacing. I'd be interested to see how that works and how it reads.
That would be an interesting exercise in literary editing. I'd be curious.
Yeah,
I'm sure someone's probably tried to do something of the sort.
Yeah, but very well handled in the films. Very well handled in the films. But your point about the Rohirrim theme and everything, the music of that one, one of the things I want to talk about from the start of this is that the recap and introduction of new elements to the film for catching viewers up who might not have seen the Fellowship, mad people that they are. It did that a very good job for me.
I mean, we certainly begin this movie with a bang.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, literally, Gandalf v Balrog is a pretty interesting way to open it, and not to obviously, as viewers, you recognise this has actually happened, but the flash cut to Frodo jumping up from the dream means that it kind of gives the excuse for having covered it beyond just interesting action sequence, right? It wasn't just a case of showing it and then cutting away and there was no benefit. It kind of gives that excuse to spend the time on it by cutting straight to Frodo and spending more of a subdued, slower time, particularly on the extended editions, hanging around with Frodo and Sam for a bit before the intro of Gollum.
Was the implication that he was seeing all of that, or is he just seeing the stuff that he remembered, and we're being shown as the viewers what happened afterward? Because it's a little unclear.
You could take it either way.
I mean, I know it doesn't really matter. I'm just, it's.
I've never taken it literally. Like, he remembers that Gandalf fell. We saw what happened when he fell. He's dreaming bad dreams about Gandalf's gone.
Right.
Yeah.
And from his perspective, that's just happened. So
yeah, I mean, it's been a maximum of a month, right?
Audience.
Less than even. It's been a few weeks. So yeah, no, it's I like it as the excuse to have that big action set piece without it just being, hey, we had to show something exciting at the start, before we have a slower intro.
Also,
so that was really cool.
Also, the fact that was actually, Ian being like strung up and like made it seem like he's like falling and actually like with the sword. I mean, he had to do a lot of physical stuff for this role, which at his age at the time is really impressive. So you got to definitely give the guy credit.
Very cool effects as well. They get less is more while also doing quite a lot with the Balrog is really cool. I enjoyed that action sequence.
The best bit of it, my favorite shot in the whole movie, I think, is the two of them tumbling down into the lake.
Yeah, like, exactly. That quiet end shot, point. Exactly.
And it's
playing into the music as well.
And it's like illuminating the water. You can't tell there's water down there at first until like the light of the Balrogs like fires like what illuminates that. That's the coolest thing.
All those kind of thematic pullbacks and showing you kind of larger scope and the kind of mythic quality. They always handle that really well in this film, whether it's through the music or through the shots or any combination of that. Really powerful. The artistry of this film, I think, probably shines the highest, the quickest compared to the other two films, because they're doing more impressive things with.
Because Helms Deep is it's dirty and muddy. And
exactly.
For like a long time, and
So it's nice,
great, but I mean, it's less visually interesting, or less variation from the other two films.
But in terms of like the art of what they're doing, I mean, with everything with Gollum, for example, we talked last time about how that's a technical marvel. This is the film that puts it front and center, for the start of it, really. Phenomenal work. I mean, the introduction to him as a character is well handled in story terms, but just how. Yes, obviously you can see the age. It clearly has aged, but considering this was basically the first big success story of its type,
Yeah.
Oh yeah. To be fair, to be clear, I'm not saying the whole thing is aged. There are some scenes where it still really holds up, but there are some the overall work of it. You can hit a scene here, a shot there.
It's because you said. It's because you specifically mentioned his intro, which I think is flawless.
Yeah, sorry. I do want to be clear. It's the immediate follow-up when he's being dragged along by the leash, for example, where it's back to day, and some of the it's specifically the shading against between him and the ground. Yeah, that's the kind of thing where you see.
But even that looks better than most things still today.
For sure.
When I think of like the Black Gate scene where he's awkwardly like on the like the boulder, like that looks like that would have to be one of the first things they did, like before they really dialed it in. And I'm not even sure is that an extended cut scene, like, or is that part of the theatrical?
Sure, I think that happens in the theatrical. Yeah, I think it does.
I feel like
that's probably the worst looking thing that's actually in the movie for me, as far as Gollum is concerned. But
overall, it's phenomenal. But you do see parts of the age here and there in single shots, certain scenes that were clearly done earlier in the process, etc. All that stuff.
Yeah.
But the fact
it's only if you compare it to what comes after that. Anything really.
The fact that this was the first, obviously we'd had extremely good special effects, better special effects before this film, but specifically in the terms of mocap of an actual character, as gangly and skeletal as this character is, they had to really strike the balance of the cartoonish kind of style without ever getting to actual cartoonish levels. The pairing of the artistry of moving around with the actual mocap physicality of Andy Serkis plus the actual CGI artistry of and work of the facial expressions, particularly the facial expressions, is phenomenal. It's incredible how well this character holds up for it being the first of its type.
Really lucky with him, because he was and possibly still is. He's getting older, but like a rock climber, like mountain climber, like very physical guy. And I think that that's just his life. I don't think that that's like on his call sheet, like of things you must do as like an actor or whatever.
Yeah,
They
exactly.
hired him for his voice.
Yeah,
He
they never
wasn't.
actually
He
expected to
was
use the
supposed to
mocap
be
for it.
going. Yeah, he was supposed to be going just into a booth and doing the Gollum voice, and like, and he became like the whole shebang. Plus, he kind of looks like an older Elijah Wood. Like if like he's got the same sort of general facial structure, and so that commonality, and also blue eyes, but a different shade of blue. But and obviously the eyes of Gollum are, colored to however he needs to look. But you get the point. There's a commonality between their just the actors' physical resemblance, and so that kinship or shared sort of burden, as they talk about, of the ring bearer. It's perfect.
Sits in the back of the viewer's mind as that
you,
subconscious kind of note.
Even if you had wanted to like demand all of that from an actor, it would have been completely unreasonable. This is only the product of luck, and I think it says something that book we referenced last time, he does the foreword, because he's kind of the cast, the person that was like, he never got to leave. He was there like for pre-production, post-production, like there during. He was always needed. I think he said he's spent like, he's from the UK, or at least he's a UK citizen, and I think he said he's spent like 7 birthdays in New Zealand because of this work,
It's
off and on. So he
And
devoted like his life to it, and it made his career. So he's he was kind of like the unsung hero, you could say, almost, if you wanted to put it that way. Because
Yeah,
were still
if he
singing
hadn't
his
also
praises,
gone on to
but,
basically be the father of mocap at the same time. So like as he makes clear himself, like he was never expecting it to be the big role. He thought, oh, this is kind of a relatively small role compared to what it would be, just a speaking like a voice role for this. Sure, there's a better thing, and it turns out to be one of the things that steals the show. It's
and he got
phenomenal.
And he effectively pioneered a new style of just acting and technological filmmaking. I mean, say what obviously the debate on like is mocap acting quote unquote true acting is still something people discuss to this day, but
it's acting.
even so, yeah, it absolutely is. But the fact that he got to kind of spearhead so much of that and would go on to do like so much more. I mean, he got to play, speaking of Peter Jackson, he got to play King Kong when he did his King Kong remake a couple of years after this, and a lot of people really sung his praises then too. So and obviously he would go on
good,
to
but like the Planet of the Apes movies, I think were better.
That's literally what I was about to get to. And then he did the Planet of the Apes, remake trilogy, which, oh my gosh, those movies are talk about something that had no right to be as incredible as they were. Those were insane. Good,
off topic, but the one that came out like a year or two ago, like the newest one, was so disappointing. Like I was so bored. I was looking forward to that. We could talk about it another time maybe. I almost fell asleep in the theater. I don't remember the last time I've done that. But
wow. I enjoyed it. It was definitely a bit of a step down, but we'll see.
I went in certain I would love it, but it was not a love experience at all. But anyway, back to this. So are we talking about like the actual scene itself with like the hobbits meeting him and all that?
Introduction to Gollum. I like straight away. I will say this: the fact that they straight away reestablish, I should say, Frodo and Sam's agency in the narrative by quickly, subduing Gollum and all that. I really appreciate that, because, you want to, if you were, you want to establish like from the get-go that these two, like, yes, even though they broke away from the Fellowship, are still capable enough to where they could still accomplish these tasks later on in the series. And I really like that. It's very subtle, again, minor bits of storytelling that kind of shows like, okay, we can follow this from here, and obviously setting up conflicts later down the road. So again, that's really appreciative as well.
It's a good way of opening up to Gollum as well, because obviously he's a threat. He represents a very real threat to the two of them, narratively, if not physically, but that too. But also, you need to be able to pity him, and the earlier you can establish that kind of that mix between the two, the more powerful, the more time you got the viewers kind of got to spend in that headspace to lead up and start ramping them up to what's going to be happening in the third film in particular. We need to kind of get into Frodo's perspective in terms of how we see Gollum, and they did a very good job of that. The kind of balance between him being that what we've described as this kind of evil creature, to that person who's been carrying this burden, the person who's been tormented and reduced by their experience with the ring. I mean, that's the other thing as well. It's got to sell the threat of the ring, because everything that happens with Gollum is in the back of the viewer's mind for what will happen potentially to Frodo or anyone who gets their hands on this thing. So it's you need to kind of capture the essence of that story to have everything that follows with the rest of the journey for the two hobbits really land. So yeah, good job they did get it as right as they did. Did you have always said, Matt, that the Frodo and Sam portions of the books have always been your favorite parts of the last 2/3 of the trilogy? That holds up for the film, I assume, for you, right? They managed to make that work.
Well, I mean, Frodo, Sam, Gollum. My favorite
That's what I mean.
Characters,
Sorry,
my
that portion
favorite
of the journey.
My favorite characters across the piece are Gollum, Sam, and Frodo in the books. I mean, sorry, did I say Gollum, Sam, and Frodo? Gollum, Sam, and Gandalf are my favorite characters in the book, right? Frodo, I could take or leave. I like him a lot better in the movies, actually. Like, I'm not a Tolkien scholar. Sorry, I don't mind saying it. I think Frodo's like, he's just like I don't know. Frodo, he's from a different time. You know what I mean? He never felt as fun as Bilbo, and at the same time, he's not quite the same character and shouldn't be. And I admire some of the things that are expressed through Frodo as a character, but never am I revisiting like a Frodo quote or passage or whatever just for the sake of it. I love Gollum, I love Sam, I love Gandalf. My favorite part of The Hobbit is Riddles in the Dark. So like Gollum's always been like a haunting, like it's Tolkien's best character as far as I'm concerned, and kind of feels the least like him. Like I feel like he had to do the most kind of imaginative work of putting himself into that mindset. And maybe I don't know what his personal demons were, what his life was, or like what he really thought about things aside from what he expressed in his letters or notes or whatever he said. But it just seems like such a triumph of the imagination, because in no way do I think that there's a Gollum inside of Professor Tolkien. You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem.
You certainly hope not.
It just seems like such a strange thing. And he's so much more powerful than a monster. Like he's a warped person. It's like you could become that. It's a scary thought. Anyone could wind up that way. I think that I've always kind of sensed that, just because I find other people they can get quite boring really quickly to me, like depending on what kind of person they are. I don't have a hard time, interacting with people, but I don't make very many close friends because most people aren't interesting to me, or I feel like it's just a different wavelength that I'm on from like most people. I've never liked I don't know that people say this in real life, but on the internet, a lot of people refer to other people as normies. I hate that. I don't like that. I don't like when people say, "Oh, normies think this," but it just implies that like you're on some kind of pedestal or whatever. But I kind of feel what people mean, like when they reach for that term, And for me, I think that there is a little bit of a barrier between me and most other people, and I have always felt that way, like from when I was a kid. And so even when I would read The Hobbit, I think, I do not want to grow up and be this thing, like in this swampy little cave or whatever. Like it's such a like weird, it's so much scarier than a dragon and their fire to me. Like, you know what I mean?
Kind of that live lesson of what can happen if you fall for the temptations of the ring and evil.
Yeah. And we were made to read the book in school, The Hobbit. I know we're not talking about The Hobbit today, sorry, but like, I didn't need a teacher to tell me that. You know what I mean? I just kind of felt that.
Well, it's always more terrifying when you know that like things like addiction, and obviously it warping you is very real, like can and does happen, in your day to day. It's like you're never gonna, well, hopefully this doesn't happen, but you're never gonna, you're almost certainly never gonna, walk out your door and encounter an actual dragon. But you could very well and walk out your door one day and run into someone who's struggled with addiction, or you could become someone who struggles with addiction, and all the demons that come from that. Like the more realistic it is, the more it hits. And I think that's also probably something else Tolkien really tried to emphasize with the character, because it's believable, and that's what makes it scary. Even if it does have obviously that fantasy magic sprinkled in as well.
Yeah, we spoke last time how it's very clear and obvious and spoken to death about the fact that Tolkien doesn't like allegory. He's never achieved as much success in avoiding that while still delivering the powerful kind of universal relatability of the struggle of the journey and particularly evil in a more personal way than he does with the Ring and Gollum. The two have that shared twin relationship within the story, that this is what evil on the personal level is represented here very powerfully. like everything you've just said there, Evan, and what people can face in real life, you know, you can learn those lessons, like you say, Matt, from a very early age in reading this kind of story. It's a good, and it's never written as a lesson. You know, he's done a very good job of expressing it as this is a truth of life. This has happened. This can happen to people. Look what this you know, what perils lie ahead for people who do fall to that temptation and then that addiction afterwards. Be wary of it. You know, be wary of it. But yeah, as we said last time, this is going to definitely just be kind of a hype piece. There's not going to be many hot takes taken on this. Everything that is handled by the films and of course the books with regards to these three in particular is very powerful. But speaking of three hunters next. Very exciting, very dynamic, very fun opening from the Fellowship side of the equation to the films. I always loved this. I mean, just hearing that music as they're sprinting across the hills, it makes me want nothing more than to join them and just run up there and pointlessly run across a hill as a child. Wakes the inner child quite powerfully, that one.
You weren't too far from doing that recently, so
I did do that quite recently, actually. I'll
there you go.
throw it up there now. For the memes, but yeah, I love the opening to this and introduction back to the Fellowship theme as well. You talked about the Rohan theme, which is definitely always top 5, probably top 3 in terms of the memorability. You know, when I think of Lord of the Rings hype pieces, it's up there
in that category. But I will say this though, even though this is a good reintroduction to those characters, once again, like, you know, Legolas is just kind of serving as the exposition guy.
This is from, like I said, post Lorien in film 1, it's basically, I mean, it's a drinking game. He says like 2 lines that aren't just let me state the obvious for the sake of the viewer, and they're both with Gimli, I think. From there may be some more from memory, but I'm pretty sure it's just him saying side by side with a friend and like help you get a box. And the despair as well. The third line with Aragorn. I should not. I was going to say
that was a good one when he's talking with Aragorn.
Yeah, that was a really good one. But yeah, but it's 3 or 4 then, and everything else is just I'm going to just state.
That's like the whole time he does it in the trilogy. Really, like he has like a real scene, like of that kind of weight and gravity, like when he's talking to Aragorn about how it's all doomed and everything. I mean, you know, it always makes me laugh as well. That's there because everything else is just. Everything else is either obvious or it's sort of, I don't even know if the language is always borrowed from Tolkien, but like his first one in this, they run as if the very whips of their masters were behind them. I mean, it's just sort of like, okay. You know,
did we talk about last time, by the way, just more broadly about how the archaic language is landed so well in the films? Because obviously it's intended to be, I couldn't remember we mentioned it, because
they added a little bit of modern flair to it, but it never goes too far one way or the other, which is nice.
Exactly. They don't go exactly. They don't go straight rote from the book most of the time, but they let in a lot more than the average film of this era would have done, and I'm really grateful for that. And also they deliver on it. It never sounds silly to me. You know, the lines with Legolas are probably the most egregious examples, or the most the furthest down the line, closest to the edge of that, but it's never been a problem. Aside from the fact that it's basically all Legolas does.
well, I think with him you have a bit more wiggle room with that, because obviously him being an elf, you would expect him to kind of have a very different speech pattern to people like Aragorn and even Gimli to an extent. So I think
a prince as well.
The characterization just naturally kind of lends itself to giving him a bit more of that space and order. And even then, it never feels overdone, which obviously they did bring in like actual Tolkien centric dialect coaches to kind of help with each of the actors in this, which really does help.
Yeah, Elvish in particular was a recipient of that for sure.
I do also appreciate just, again, little world building, character acting sort of points, but the fact that it's established that they've been pursuing them for like 3 days straight, and it's sort of obviously implied that, you know, because it's Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas who are the ones pursuing, they're actually physically capable of doing those things. Whereas if if Frodo and Sam were still with them, they probably wouldn't be able to catch up in time. So again, just little world building points that I do appreciate, because obviously you have Legolas, who's an elf, and then you have Aragorn, who's a ranger and one of the Dunedain, and then you have Gimli, who's an experienced dwarf. Like their endurance and their ability to kind of keep these sorts of pursuits going is more, you know, naturally attuned to them. Whereas with, you know, obviously with the hobbits, it's not quite the same. So I appreciate the fact that you could tell, like, they're the only reason they're able to do this is actually because the Fellowship split up, even though it wasn't really maybe the best thing at the time. So.
And Gimli in full armor as well.
Storytelling without telling you straight to your face. Nice.
I also like the fact that it gives the excuse for why the Uruk-hai don't quite when the Uruk-hai have to slow down and they give the three a chance to catch up with them. It's because the orcs have been brought in and they can't run as fast as long. So little tiny insignificant hand wave don't matter story touches like that, they add up. It helps in the background. But yeah, in the book this is sold as this is going to be a story for the three races. This is going to be something that is talked about for decades and centuries to come. Is they kind of make this much more of a storied mythological exploit. And I like how that's they've captured the essence of that with just that running. They've upped the pace on the walking scenery shots and made it a running scenery shot instead. I like how they've done that. So very, very effective.
Speaking of the Uruk-hai, do we want to kind of talk a little bit about some of the Saruman sequences, because those are kind of
that's the tail end of the recap. Like they do a very good job.
Yeah.
Having Christopher Lee stand there and kind of and hash out the transition point between the recap from the first film to the setup for the second. Very effective and kind of gives you the expectation and lead into the film as a whole, but also the scene setting, the scale of what's against Rohan. This is Isengard. This is the other tower they're facing. Excellent choice in kind of reeling the viewer back into the world and setting the expectations of what's going to happen for the rest of the film. Because if you don't do the groundwork here and don't set the stage, then Helm's Deep, no matter how amazing it is, it's irrelevant. This is already starting to feed into that climax from the very beginning.
Yeah, I mean, I like, it's also a good way of just showcasing the sort of industrial specialty that Saruman is capable of, because obviously if you go in to the deep lore, both him and Sauron, obviously served under Aule, I believe, the smith, the Maiar, whose specialty is crafting. So the fact that they're both kind of studied under that same individual, and the fact that those sort of quirks come into play even now when they're on Middle Earth is, again, it's a good way of differentiating your factions from what's already established, and also establishing their threat level. I will say I like the forging of a lot of the weapons and the armor and stuff. That's all good. The fact that he's tearing down the trees will obviously be set up for the Ents going to war later. That's all well and good.
Very questionable decision on Saruman's part, by the way. He could have got the wood from elsewhere without invoking the wrath.
I was about to say it's a little kind of like
it's fine. It's not a criticism. It's just funny to think that he just couldn't have gone a little bit further afield.
It's one of those nature of filmmaking where it's oh, this is obviously foreshadowing to something that's gonna bite him in the ass later. But it's okay.
It's completely fine.
You need to do that in some point, so it's I'm not bothered by it.
Well, the whole thing is Tolkien's, I won't say obsession, that's the wrong word for it, but his conviction of the primacy of nature, in the threat imposed by industry to it, So I mean, the only reason why it's there is because he wanted it to be there, So I mean, I won't dock it for that,
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, we wouldn't have the entire plot line if it weren't for that.
Exactly. I mean, he lived through the tail end of the steel age of the Industrial Revolution, so he was literally seeing the cities growing and seeing the kind of Isengard imagery spreading into his countryside life. So it makes sense.
It also
and he lived through World War One. Just a small little thing like that.
Yeah. Well, and also just too, it establishes building an army is not something you can just do. There's a lot that goes into it. So I like the idea that you're actually seeing, I don't know if struggle's the right word, but the actual building and seeing it come together rather than it just happening. Again, it's just a good little bit that you probably wouldn't see in some other movies. So it's
also
very nice to see.
Also, we should give props to the orc workforce. I mean, I know most of them are slaves, but the fact that they can throw up a dam and dam the river as quickly as they do and as effectively as they do, they are quite industrious.
Without machines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Nothing but troll strength to help them, and I suppose Saruman if he's helping out a bit with magic. But yeah, no, it always makes me laugh how fast that goes up in film terms. Obviously, it's longer in the ball, but yeah. Yeah, it's funny.
Again, it's just the nature of cinematic time. I mean, obviously, in real life, this would take weeks, if months, who knows? If you would actually do this, but still, very impressive. But do you want to?
Yeah,
I guess it kind of leads us into the
Yeah,
the Rohan
exactly.
sequence.
Opposite to this, we've got the setup of the Rohan side of the equation, which in the extended edition you
Again,
get a
some
little
of the
bit
best
more of.
music ever. I just can't stop gushing about that enough.
Edoras, which is a beautiful
I
place
don't know
to
what
go.
it is about these themes that just hit me in just a certain way. It's just I love it.
It's the violin, if nothing else. Just that first
Yes.
leading in of the Rohirrim theme, as kind of watching the banner flap in the wind. Amazing. But in the extended edition, they do a little bit more of the backstory set up there. With you see Theodred being recovered by Éomer, who gets a bit more of a substantive role at this portion of the trilogy. Thanks to the extended edition, you kind of get more backstory into what the connection is there.
I remember being confused by this when this was the first film of the trilogy that I saw in the theater.
Yeah,
and I hadn't read the Two Towers as a book yet. I think I definitely read The Hobbit by that point. And I think I'd tried to read The Fellowship, but I hadn't been into Two Towers yet. I don't know who these people are.
And the fact they're bringing one back dead, it's like, did we miss a bit? Did we miss a film? It feels like he should be relevant.
More noticeable cuts.
I think
that really does.
I think structurally speaking, this is one of the biggest. I mean, I love everything in the extended edition, even the things that shouldn't necessarily or aren't needed rather in the theatrical version. But this one was probably one of the more substantive examples of a piece that, if it had been in the theatrical, it would have helped make a lot more make sense. You wouldn't have had to intuit.
It's not quite as egregious as Return of the King cutting Saruman at the beginning, but it's definitely up there.
Yeah, no, for sure.
How much time did that even save? Like 2 minutes?
I know, right? And it was good
If
stuff for
that,
Theoden too.
yeah.
You see some more of the rounding out of Theoden's character too. There's a lot to that opening sequence, but yeah.
But like the fact that you see, the king, in such, King Theoden in such a reduced state, you immediately know what Grima is all about from his introduction.
Grima Wormtongue, who's sitting there looking like that with the boils and the hunchback and the clawed hands, and he's like, I think.
I know. I think even Starscream would look at that and be like, "Man,
that's a perfect example." Yeah, fits right in with that archetype, or the other way around. But yeah, that's hilarious.
Having said that, like in all seriousness, Brad Dourif's an amazing actor.
Oh yeah, phenomenal.
In this role.
Phenomenal. It's always so jarring watching him in the interviews behind the scenes stuff when it's like, oh god, that your Wormtongue. Oof, he did a great job.
Talk about a transformation. I mean, you really got to give him credit, not just because again. The character acting, the way he moves, and the way he looks at different people, in his eyes, the fact that you can see the wheels turning behind his head at every second, just it's so well done. But I also like even things like Éowyn instantly seeing rejecting his advances. It's just it's so creepy, but it's the fact that you're immediately giving her agency is also pretty good because her role is pretty heavily expanded in the films, but I appreciate that as well.
There's two things I want to make. Well, three now you mentioned actually. One is the fact that it's expanded role. Perfect choice. Brilliant. Needed that for the trilogy. It helps sell the culture of Rohan, helps round out the character casting in terms of diversity. She's one of the more interesting characters of the trilogy in terms of secondary characters. Loved that choice. With regards to Wormtongue, that scene there, I mean that's Tolkien in the film form anyway. Tolkien at his most Shakespearean with when all your life seems to shrink, the walls of your bower closing around you. That was the part that I always remember for Grima. Like it's him at his most. I'm not going to say subtle because it obviously isn't, but that's him at his most. Like the ideas that are being played within the scene, that's him at his most subtle, and I like that in terms of setting up his motivation.
He's menacing.
Yeah, exactly. And Éowyn, you see
the two of them there. So
and you see she's never going to fall for the shtick. I mean, who would in that situation? Yeah. But you see that kind of that momentary leaning into the potential to fall for it. And then what am I doing? It helps sell the whole how far the culture is falling at the moment. How far the despair has set in and taken root into this place. All of the stuff here, it's not about Wormtongue. It's not about the characters present. It's about building the idea of Rohan in our minds and introducing the viewer to that kind of new concept within the setting. Because this is the first time we've seen, outside of the Hobbits, obviously, in the Shire, a culture that isn't like the highborn elves, so very holier than thou and kind of above it all. This is the first time we've seen kind of a human piece of storytelling within the law. I mean, Bree doesn't exactly count in terms of scope. So yeah, it's an important set piece, particularly in terms of tying up the characters Theoden and Aragorn and their journey, but also Minas Tirith later on. Like if we don't care about Rohan, if we don't understand Rohan, if we don't feel the impact and the perfection of that music, kind of tying all of their culture together, then the whole trilogy is going to fall flat, leading into the third film.
And that of course, first of all, I completely agree. and that also leads into Eomer's exile and the fact that they're setting up his loyalty to his uncle from the get-go. I also, again, super subtle, but like the signature on the notice that that Grima shows Eomer,
trailing off.
I mean, the fact that like you could just imagine like this, Theoden just like all whacked out, just like barely able to lift his hand. I mean, again, it's like so subtle, and I love it because it's telling with, again, I'm probably gonna use this phrase a lot, but like telling without telling. It's like we get it, like we can see just from that like what the actual deal is, and the fact that Eomer himself can clearly tell that that's what's going on, but he can't do anything about it. Again, it's just brilliant, and it's a good way of setting up his interpersonal conflict during his exile and all that too, which is again fantastic.
But yeah, we kind of get that glimpse of Rohan as a culture to start with, and then we turn back to the Three Hunters as Eomer's having been banished and leaving and heading further out to the west. I believe it's the west.
With this pretty considerable force. Again, I like how it establishes that his soldiers, their loyalty to him, and again, you're immediately establishing Eomer as somebody. He has authority, obviously, because of his royal blood, but the fact that he's clearly an experienced warrior who can like lead these people and inspires loyalty. Again, it's good way of giving him that agency for his triumphant return later on. So again, good stuff.
And also it needs to be exactly setting up that fact that he will be bringing that force, and a much larger one, for the Helm's Deep stuff. So if we don't have all of this, it just kind of that becomes more of a Deus Ex Machina. And
him just showing up with just all these soldiers would be kind of awkward.
To say the least. Yeah, exactly. Also, note is that is played by is replacing the role of Erkenbrand in the book as well. It wasn't Eomer that did that in the books.
True.
From memory. So yeah, we get the introduction of the three to the Rohirrim side of the equation. That we have Aragorn and Legolas and Gimli talking to him. It's a funny scene. I also it never caught my eye before. Obviously, everyone always knows about the continuity error with. Yeah, when Eomer's mounting up the sword and the sword falls out the sheath, I knew that because obviously everyone knows continuity in this film, but I'd never noticed it in the watching before, and I saw it in this one. I was like, how did I miss that before? He mounts up and rides off, and the sword just falls straight out of the. Always makes me laugh. Remembering that one. But yeah,
the actual does anyone have anything about the actual ambush with like Merry and Pippin? I mean, obviously you have the transition of like the big horse hooves about to crush him, and then it immediately smash cuts. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I said how I like the intro to this film, how it catches the viewer up on everything that's happened before. No exception with those two. Their role at this portion is probably the thing I'm least interested in. Within the setup of Two Towers at the moment, but having said that, it's done very well. They set up they're the stakes effectively of the chase for the Three Hunters. So if you don't do that well, then why are they running across the hills to dramatic music? So that's very cool.
To your point, though, I do like the fact that them leaving like little, I was gonna almost say they're not actually leaving breadcrumbs, but figuratively speaking,
not idly did the leaves of Lorien fall. I love that line as he's just.
I know that's really good, and also it's a good way of just further emphasizing Aragorn's like tracking and like ranger training really coming to the forefront, because they know that his attunement is sensitive enough to pick up on those little things, and the fact that the orcs won't notice them again. Good stuff, because it would be very easy for them just to be the hobbits in distress, but the fact that they're actually giving them a little bit of agency, like no, they're actively trying to escape by giving them little clues is I like that.
I mean, it's literally the first shot of Aragorn of the film. Is listening to the rock. There's like one bear rock can tell, and then music kicks. Oh, love it, love that. But yeah, we get the introduction to them to the ambush. We get the completely insignificant moment where helmet's kicked. Don't need to talk about that. And they find the tracks leading into Fangorn, and we cut into the start of the Ent portion of this film. We spoke a little about it a little bit last time. In terms of the special effects and the scene work and everything, and the story that's being told here, very well done, very well executed, very believable.
John Rhys Davies voicing Treebeard.
Yeah, brilliant. Playing double duty as playing Treebeard as well as Gimli. I don't really have much to say about this one. It's as great as everyone thinks it is, I'm sure, for me. It's also the least interesting part of the story as far as I'm concerned. It's one of it suffers by its proximity to the main everything that's going on with the Fellowship and with Frodo, Sam, and Gollum as well. It's always the part where you're still enjoying it, but you could, if you were going to skip over any parts of the film, this is it for me.
I enjoy the Ents as like concepts and characters and and all that. And again, John Rhys Davies' performance as Treebeard is perfectly fine. But when it comes to this film specifically, I think I'm just kind of more admiring the effects than anything. It's just because, in terms of the grand narrative, the fact that it is, and I get it, it's deliberately slow because Ents are just like that. So that's all well and good. But I agree that some of the sequences are, again, if you have the fast forward button on hand and you're trying to watch this in a hurry, yeah, this would probably be the area. But that being said, this is also eventually builds into our setup of Gandalf coming back, which we'll get to in a bit. But yeah, as far as these sequences go, I'm kind of indifferent at best.
Can I ask a question? Just devil's advocate here. If you take the Ents out, does this feel especially like a fantasy film?
Not particularly.
It feels less so.
Yeah,
I will.
yeah. I think that's part of why I would advocate keeping them in there. Like if I had the choice to axe them, I don't think I would.
Oh no, I wouldn't either. No, for sure.
I wouldn't either. Yeah, it's just as it's set up. It's a bit of a break.
You're right that it's the most readily apparent and consistent aspect of it, because with the exception of obviously the ring, the Nazgul, with the Fell Beast, I mean in particular, and then Gandalf's charge down the hill, all you've got really is the fact that you've got orcs present in the Uruk-hai, etc. Otherwise, it is just a medieval film.
Basically, just bad people.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
swords.
So, exactly. So
we do get like
you're right
like
that's the element they bring, the
ethereal
kind of fantasy side.
But as it is, yeah,
which goes way to in the other direction. But yeah, no, you're right. And also, all of this is laying the foundation and setting up the fact that we are going to get a really cool dismantling of Isengard, thematic victory over Saruman and the why behind it. You have to do all of this to make that work. And yeah, it's a somewhat slow-paced, borderline boring situation because that's by design. These are trees that are talking. It's slow, it's steady. It's not the fast pace of the industrial age and now the digital age that we're used to living with. This is back when things took their time. Don't be hasty, as is the line.
Yeah. It is also nice that you're pairing the most, loud and fast-moving hobbits with the slow Ents. That's a fun little contrast that they play around with pretty well. Like when Treebeard's like telling them like poetry and they're kind of into it at first, but then they just fall asleep. That's awesome. I don't know. There's something about that I always found really charming, and the fact that they're just riding on his back and just chilling. That's cool. And
people get some Bombadil through Treebeard as well. So, it wasn't completely excised
I'll
from
take
the
them over Bombadil.
Likewise.
I'll take the Ents over Bombadil any day.
Absolutely.
Did we talk about that last time?
I think we touched on the fact that had been taken out.
I apologize if anybody around here listening to us likes Tom Bombadil, but I just don't get it, and I don't want to, quite frankly.
I'm with you on that one.
I've always been kind of indifferent. Yeah, I could take it or leave it, but
we cut back from you mentioned before, Evan, Gandalf is the main point here. We were reintroduced to Gandalf, who is basically trolling.
Let's back up for a second. It's not immediately apparent that it is Gandalf at first, which is nice because you only see his back. You see him from the back at first, and the fact that
completely just
it's described as like a white wizard walking around. You're led to think that it's Saruman at first, which is a nice little setup too. Especially if you haven't read the book, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, also if you haven't read the books and you don't know the lore, which would be impressive unless you were younger watching these films, you don't expect it to be Gandalf because of course you don't. Gandalf's dead. It's certainly not coming back as a glowing white Saruman equivalent. So yeah, you expect that, and they did a good job on the voice work as well with the switch between Christopher Lee and Ian McKellen's voice. I like the chop and change between that. It's a good balance. But character wise, it is odd though. It's just Gandalf messing around with the three of them. It's like, I'll pretend I'm Saruman. Why not?
He's kind of out of it, right? Because he's not quite himself.
He's coming back.
I feel like it's.
Yeah,
like when he gives him his name back, it's kind of similar to when Frodo gives Gollum back.
Yeah, exactly. It's played with a little bit. It's and the fact that it is representing that kind of angelic descending force as well. I like the idea behind it. I think just the film. Yeah, the ideas behind is perfect, but the film just I feel like it's a little bit skew a bit in how it's delivered, particularly because he's met Merry and Pippin at this point very much. Like he's had that conversation and then had this one. So.
But it's like, I think it doesn't bother me as much because it's very clearly like you're not, they're all kind of like working with not like a full deck at this point. So what exactly is happening and what did happen is kind of left up to interpretation unless you go into like the really, really deep lore. So I think as it stands, I think it's fine enough. And also Obviously this is also where we get like the flashback of like what happened with him and the Balrog, you know, fighting atop the hill, which is an amazing set piece. I
Very
have to
metal.
say,
Very metal.
it looks crazy with the
Also,
lightning crackling around and all that. That's crazy. I love it.
And the effect when he's out of it and he's kind of ascending, for the, you know, the lifetime, every moment was a lifetime, age of the lifetime of the earth, kind of that line. The effect of that was very good for its time as well. Obviously, loads of things have done that kind of thing. That wasn't particularly spectacular compared to other things that the film achieves, but I always found that was quite powerful. The kind of cleanness of it, the kind of purity it's kind of capturing. I think it worked really well. Also, in terms of the shot, when you're seeing Gandalf's face and it's kind of shifting from the white hue to kind of actualize Ian McKellen's face, with the shot of it when he crosses the staff and you kind of get the visual kind of clarity there. I love that moment, and with the music in the background, it's a very, very well executed beat for me. I mean, this trilogy is nothing but great shots and ideas, but that one's a cool one for this portion of the film.
Yeah, and I think design-wise, I really like Gandalf the White's, just like, you know, not just his silhouette, but like the white robes and the new staff. The fact that his hair looks a little bit different too. It's a good. They do a fantastic job of like, you know, portraying, you know, like the fact that yes, this is the same character, but it also isn't. And again, it goes back to the whole mysticism of it and what exactly is going on. The fact that he refers to himself as, oh, I am Saruman, or Saruman as he should have been, and the implication, you could read a lot into that and come to a lot of interesting conclusions. So I really like that, which is ironic considering that Ian is like on record saying that he prefers,
I was about to say the exact
Gandalf
same thing. Yeah,
Gandalf the Grey as opposed to Gandalf the White, but I think he nails both personally. I like both incarnations. It's just
completely agree. Yeah,
you know?
Yeah, I'm with him. I was going to say the exact same thing on record for that. I prefer Gandalf the Grey. Just comes across as more of a homely, more wholesome, more kind of a Dumbledore Hagridy friend, you know, character. Whereas Gandalf the White is more of the elven variety. He's more of the untouchable, kind of ethereal, higher being type. But both are very well executed. And I like the human touches of Gandalf the White after the fact as well. Like he is still Gandalf. He is still grounded and still him.
Give them
you know?
a third film. And like when Pippin's crouched before Denethor, he's like, "Guess hop." You know, he's like
Gimli coming in with this Gandalf's grumpier than the old Gandalf. Like the fact that it shows you this is gonna still be the same character, but there is that tonal shift behind him where he isn't quite. I mean, the fact that he's even the purity thing you mentioned, Evan, the fact they visually represent that on film later on with the fact that he can't smoke, you know, pipe, that he's come back refreshed and renewed and more than he was, etc. I like the balance. Right. Same character, same Gandalf. We love him just as much. Perfectly handled by Ian McKellen in that way, but still, there's a difference here. There's a shift in the purpose behind him.
Speaking of which, you know, that kind of leads, you know, in us going back to, you know, the land of Rohan, obviously with Gandalf in tow.
Just before we do, just want to touch on the Shadowfax point.
Sure.
Not significant, but did anyone else get confused by what Shadowfax is supposed to be in terms of the film? Because in the film, it plays like he's, I mean, Legolas's line even makes him sound like it's some kind of
all horses.
Yeah, but in the book, he's just one of Theoden's horses, right? Gandalf picked him up on the way back to get back to Frodo originally, and this is a horse that he then gets back again later. But so in the film, I was like, this is like a Pegasus, like unicorn type thing, an ethereal being that he's calling with his wizard powers, and later turns out that no, it's just a really, really cool horse.
I mean, it would have been cool if he was a Pegasus. That would have been interesting. Yeah.
But, I didn't know or care really what he was. I was just like tripped up over the name. I thought it was like a ninja that works in an office somewhere. It should be called Shadowfax. Yeah, but when I was a kid, I was like, that's a weird name for a magic horse, if that's what it is. But anyway, it's kind of a cool name now. It's grown on me. But also like when he was fighting the Balrog, I love like Gandalf's line of like, you know, I threw down my enemy and
I smote his ruin on the mountainside. Yeah, exactly.
It's
like,
oh yeah, we've all been there. We've all done that. You know? Stole my diary.
It's kind of obvious, but yeah, the archaic language doesn't work better, or never works better than when it's coming out of Ian McKellen's mouth. He absolutely nails that. But yeah, it's a really good one.
Also, what's his name? Elrond can get away with it. Like his whole speech about how Aragorn's gonna die and it's gonna be really terrible. Arwen, like, that's like a really. I mean, it verges on, you know, shouldn't work, but the skillfulness of the actor, you know, Hugo Weaving really sold that, you know. So, but anyway, you guys want to talk about?
They're both very similar sort of like style of actors. You know, they both have beginnings in stage, which
the
definitely
theater training,
definitely helps in series and films like this. I mean, you're turning back to Rohan.
A play together. That would be interesting. I'd be curious if they ever did that.
There's a lot of overlap behind the scenes. Like character actors of their type and people who've worked on stage. There's a lot of them that have kind of had very many plays together. I wouldn't be surprised if they had. It's a small scene over here.
To talk about?
In scale, it's all happening in London.
Yeah. I love at the outside the castle where they're asking for their weapons, and of course Gandalf's like, you went into private old man
from his walking stick.
Again, little quirks like that, which I love.
Yeah.
Again, a good little bit of humor. And I also like too, though, at that same time, even though they don't have their weapons, the fact that Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas are able to take down those guards.
Okay, see that?
Yeah,
that stuff is a little silly. Like to me, like that resides more at home in something like, I was gonna say Indiana Jones, but I feel like usually like something like that, or like it's almost comical, like in a way that I don't know best serves the scene. You know,
yeah,
like
I was about to
myself.
say that was one of the most egregious examples of, hey, this is the film, we have to keep people's attention, which you didn't need to do.
I thought it was cool personally, but
they did it well for what they're doing. But I agree that with a lot of people, this didn't need to happen. This was very much let's make it interesting for people who are bored by the politics and the character stuff, you know. And also it's helped by the fact that you're zooming in and focusing on Gandalf. Like you can almost completely ignore the action and just listen to Ian McKellen as he's walking forward towards Theoden,
which is what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Sure. Yeah.
You say that, but I love the shot of the fact that he never breaks his stride, and all the other three are fighting around him, trying to make sure no one tries to actually interrupt him. But the fact that he never even moves whatsoever, I don't know. For some reason, I love that shot. It's a really good track. It's a really good like just tracking sort of thing. So from a filmmaking perspective, I don't know.
I also want to mention, just before we get to that scene as well, the banner coming off the pole with Eowyn standing on the backside, that kind of iconic shot, was probably one of the most memorable and powerful for me in the entire trilogy. I absolutely love that intro to Edoras, with the three riding it up to the gate, Aragorn turning back and seeing the banner fall into the grass. Visually very interesting, very cool shot, but it also what characters are seeing it fall, what characters are seeing it land, the representation of the culture and what we're being introduced to in the state of Rohan. You'll find more cheer in a graveyard line. They're doing a really good job of introducing this new piece of the world and who lives in it and what the state and condition is that needs uplifting, which ties specifically into the journeys of both Theoden and Aragorn, which are kind of jump starting here in this part of the film. So yeah, really enjoyed that.
Oh, they're actually inside the hall doing the scene that Evan was talking about earlier. For some reason, this scene was recommended to me a lot on YouTube just over the years. No idea why. And I would always click on it just because it's a fun scene, like of the liberation of King Theoden and all that. But my favorite bit of it is a little bit just like just on a meta level. Like one of my favorite YouTube comments I ever saw. So like when Gandalf comes in and he's all, "The courtesy of your hall is somewhat lessened of late, Theoden King." Like when he says that, someone said translation, "It's awfully shitty in here." I think that's like my favorite like reductionist take on it. Just like, yeah.
But it's not wrong. He is basically, and also the fact that he immediately walks in and says, he warns the other three. He does this with Pippin as well, but he warns the other three, mind your tongues. Do not look for warm welcomes here. Be careful with what you say. And the first thing he does is just like you say, it's a bit of a dump in here today, Theoden. What's happened to you?
But he's Gandalf. He can get away with it.
He's Stormcrow as well, and the way that
this is also the most hilarious scene to watch with people who don't care for fantasy or anything magical, because it's like an old man going and it's like and when you're watching somebody like who just doesn't like fantasy,
Theoden dies.
They're just like, what the hell are you watching? Like, what is this? Yeah.
I like the note of holding on to the old purity of Saruman as well. Like, you do not kill me, you will not kill him. Like that is it's a tiny, not really relevant part of the scene, but it's a good touch to help show that Saruman is not. I mean, he's sat back in his tower, not doing the dirty work himself, and there's a piece of him that's doing that for a reason. He's not wholly evil in the way that some of the other entities of his caliber we're seeing in the world are. Which I like, and I like the Saruman the White. His Saruman, sorry, Gandalf the White. Saruman as he should have been is the one telling him that. It's a cool scene. Also, you mentioned before, Evan. I think it was a few weeks ago we were talking about it, but the effect of Theoden's fading.
That's actually like it's so small, but that's one of my favorite just special effects in this. And honestly, not just this movie, maybe even the whole the whole trilogy. It's something I think like him going back to himself, the transition, the fact that there's no cuts. I don't know, like I know it like it's part, some of it's CG and some of it's clearly makeup, and the way that they blend those two aspects is nice. When he's like, dark, and then the dialogue, dark have been my dreams of late.
Yes.
Again,
It's
that's really good stuff.
There's like slight imperfections in the whole thing. I think it kind of serves it well because there's no such thing as like the realistic version of that.
Exactly.
It's otherworldly. Like,
it adds a kind of wispiness to it. The imperfections make it feel wispy because it's a relatively simple effect. It's just a fade in with a little bit of touches on top of it, obviously, but it's mostly just a fade in of different stages of practical makeup. So it's in terms of like technical skill, it's one of the least impressive of the whole trilogy, but it has a really powerful effect in how it sticks in the mind, and seeing how many layers there were as you watch it kind of fade out, and the way they've blended it makes it not quite clear. Really cool.
And the grayness,
also it's
the grayness from his eye is also fading, going back.
Well acted by him as well. Yeah, really exactly.
And well acted. And even though he's obviously, back to like his actual self, he still kind of looks like crap because he's been in like this horrible, state for a while. Because he just looks so much more like a king in like the next movie. You know what I mean? Like
exactly.
He just looks like in a bad way. It's a really powerful scene that works really well.
And something I actually noticed on this most recent viewing, and I'd never twigged before, probably because you see the film so many times, you're taking the previous viewings into mind when you're watching it. But I caught the fact that we don't know Eowyn's name until Theoden says it. He says Eowyn. So I know that face. I really like that. That kind of sells the human side of Theoden. It's the first thing he says when he comes back to himself. I think it's a really powerful way of kind of showing the relationship, showing the significance of her character, both to the viewers and also to Theoden himself, and then sets him on that journey where he's going through his kind of redemption arc, as it were, as a king, as a figurehead of leadership. And then you
get the sword draw scene. Gandalf as like, your fingers would remember your old strength if they grasp their sword.
Such a great shot.
Like the fact that like all the fingers going on one at a time. And then that theme again. I can't praise it enough. When he unsheaths the sword and you hear that, you're like,
it's so tactile. That kind of thing. When you pick something up that way, I always think of that moment. Like when he transitions from just laying the fingers on it to then grasping the hilt. It's iconic for one, but it really stays in the mind.
It's muscle memory. He's remembering what it's like the blade. It's so good.
And the camera tilt, the camera turn around the sword as well as it pans to his turn to look at Wormtongue. Beautiful.
Beautiful. Shit's about to go down. I will say too, I always like the design of that sword, the sort of the gold and the silver hilt, the kind of oval sort of thing going. I don't know. I always thought it looked that cool. And then also, speaking of effects, before we go into the next sequence, I like the transition from when Gandalf, obviously frees him by hitting him on the head with his staff. You see Saruman get thrown back, and he has like this big gash on his face, like exactly where he hit. Again, one of those things you didn't need to do, but it's a good way of selling not only Gandalf's new power and how it compares to Saruman now, but also the transition between, and how this is not just this is a loss in many ways for Saruman. So that's nice too. But then getting back to what we were saying, Theoden obviously points his
flings
sword
him down the stairs.
The fact that I will say this, the sound effects for Grima just falling head over heels on the stone walkway, it's actually pretty brutal. Like you ooh, that hurt.
Yeah, you do feel it for sure. Yeah.
And the fear in his eyes as Theoden's raising his blade, that's brutal.
And Aragorn stops him as well. So it's obviously it's a significant step for him as a character. He's he's kind of the crux around the redemption of Theoden. He's the one helping along. It's the pulling back of Theoden to the light by Aragorn is kind of the thing that elevates him for the viewer and kind of lets us see his kingly qualities itself. In the book, obviously, he's taken on that role and there's no reluctant hero aspect to him in the original material, but for the films, this is the first time we're seeing him kind of, okay, this is the king he will be. This is the kind of king he sees himself as needing to be. And Theoden is kind of learning through that, but while also himself having his own points. It's not just like I'm learning from this main character. He's got his own person. He makes his own calls, good and bad, for the two films. it's a nice pairing, particularly because these two are supposed to represent the two highest seats of the West for mankind. It's an important role to set for the setting, for the story that's being told in the background. But yeah.
And to your point though, just to build off what you were saying, I also like the fact that he listens to Aragorn, and the fact that we learn later that he's obviously had history with not just Theoden himself, but just that particular line of kings. It's a good way of just establishing the fact that he doesn't at this point maybe respect Aragorn enough as the a king in his own right. The fact that they have that history is a good way of establishing the fact that okay, like there is some even keel sort of relationship there, which is nice. Again, kind of it just comes in the subtlety, what's the phrase? The flow, of their dialogue, I think is also really well done when they're in particular between the two of them. So again, all very good stuff. And then obviously Grima, after he spares him, spits on Aragorn's hand.
Yeah, and the look on his face, like, oh come on, man, I was trying to help. It's comical.
Yeah. I mean, the fact it's also a little. I always found it a little strange, even as a kid, that they just let Grima take a horse and leave.
Yeah, as kids, you're kind of like, why? What? He's going to run off. He's going to, you're processing it as just a case of you've let the bad guys go. Now they're going to cause problems for you later on. But obviously, it's representing that lesson of Aragorn, and also Tolkien has
him running away has never been a huge issue. Wasn't much of an issue so much as him being allowed to take one of their horses for some reason as a kid.
It's a big deal in the culture to deprive a man of his horse. That's like a Rohan thing. So there's that aspect connected to the culture point. But also Tolkien has a strong theme going through his books of good showing mercy to evil and having that how that yields positive results within the world. That's one of the things obviously that most heavily comes together with the climax of the third film, with Gollum being there to basically ensure the ring's destruction, because if he'd been killed at any point before that, he wouldn't have been, and the story would have been lost, basically. So that's something that he has recurring throughout the entire story.
In the next movie, so when we get to it,
yeah.
But before we get to that, do we want to sort of go over the funeral scene?
Beautiful. Really wish it hadn't been cut. But I understand why it was, I suppose. And the follow-up to it as well was with Theoden's reaction. No parent should have to bury their child. I fell in love with Theoden at that point. That he's one of my favourite characters of the trilogy, and one of the most human as well, in terms of the journey they go on. Because he's kind of got an arc, the others don't. We just spoke about in the last film how they're mostly archetypes. And that's true of Theoden as well to an extent, but he's a lot more human in his qualities, a lot more intentionally flawed, so that he can kind of learn from these flaws and these struggles.
Is that line considered like a Tolkien line? Because I think it's so commonly said from in just every context.
I wouldn't have said so because it's a film invention, is it not?
I am not sure.
Well, I just mean, is it the first time you heard that in your life? I guess because I've always grown up hearing people say that. You know what I mean? And I just feel like it is a
pretty common saying. I highly doubt.
Yeah, I don't think people associate it particularly to Tolkien. I don't. I think it lands well because of his delivery. Okay. But I mean, it probably would have been the first time I'd heard it as a child, but it didn't resonate the same way until later. So that kind of picked up from elsewhere.
I thought you associated it with him, so that I was
it's a concept that's obviously very powerful and resonant just by itself, but his delivery of it sticks out in retrospect. I don't think it was probably true on the original viewings because I would have been very young. I'd have been like 7 or 8.
I also but speaking of dialogue, I also really like his conversation with Gandalf when he's asking Gandalf like what he's basically kind of asking Gandalf like, where is my son's soul going, and the fact that Gandalf is able to kind of give like, to the halls with with your fathers before him and all that. And it's a bit meta too when you consider that he's internally, obviously Gandalf's like an angel, so he would actually kind of know firsthand what that's like, especially considering he just recently came back from the dead. So it's a little on the nose, but I appreciate it. It doesn't break the film, and the fact that he would ask Gandalf these things makes sense too. So that's all well and good. It's just a little. It's one of those a little, like I said, on the nose points, but by no means breaks the tension or the emotionality of the scene, which is good.
And brings us straight back in. We don't sit and dwell on this. We spend just enough time to feel the emotional resonance before returning to the main story, the main plot, which it really fine balance. It doesn't dwell on it and spend.
We get those two kids from that village.
Yeah, exactly. Later, who are adorable, by the way. That little girl is like, he can't ride her on. He's too big for him. It's like, oh, so cute. But yeah, that introduces the whole situation of the Rohan becoming aware of the threat of Isengard, with Theoden now able to respond to it. And then I like how he's not receiving Gandalf very well, because he's effectively just replaced Wormtongue with another figure at his side who's telling him what to do all the time.
He's literally sitting in the same spot.
Exactly, and leaning with the hand on the armrest as well. It's like, can I just get 2 minutes to think for myself, please, Gandalf? I mean, I know you're obviously not Wormtongue, but at the same time, I'm still recovering here.
Well, I think I don't know if that was played up only for this reason, or but Ian McKellen was really into that. He really liked that idea. So like he was going like maybe a little harder than he even needed to in like selling that. He thought that was like a fun notion. But yeah, I don't know. Like this movie is one that I don't have too much to say about, like scene to scene. It's all really great stuff. I love it, but I don't have any. Yeah.
From here, we basically just get it's mainly just action.
Yeah, I was going to say we've spoken about most of the story stuff now. I mean, the rest of it comes through large scale action sequences.
I mean, obviously, we get like a cut back to Isengard where we see the force that Saruman's amassing. I will say this: I do like the conversation between him and Grima about. Well, first we see him like reacting to Gandalf, like obviously, taking Rohan from him, and he's freaking out about Gandalf's like new powers. That's a good way of showing that fear. And then him learning Grima, telling him about Aragorn and the ring that he saw, and him connecting that with the heir of why am I blanking? Oh my god, why am I blanking?
Heir of Numenor, Heir of Gondor.
Yes, yeah. Sorry.
It's like, what's the word? Heir of Elendil. Isildur. Sorry, yeah, Elendil and Isildur.
Yeah, sorry. It was Isildur's name. I was for some.
There are a lot of names in Tolkien, to be fair.
I know. I can't believe I forgot that. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. But him connecting those dots there is really nice. Again, as I alluded to before, him making the blasting powder is a good way of showcasing his technical knowledge, and the fact that Grima also almost unintentionally blows them both up with the torch. I don't know, like seeing Christopher Lee like snatch the torch from him is always sticks out in my head, because
the tiny
I mean,
Peter
of course,
Jackson
why would he know?
are funny.
Why would he know about that? But again, it's a good way of showing his technical advancement compared to everything else. And then obviously when you see the force and how extreme it is, you're like, oh geez. And then Grima obviously shedding a tear because seeing the conflict of it all. Again, all great stuff.
But like you say, after this point, it transitions mostly into an action set piece. We go from the ambush with the wargs to the arrival at Helm's Deep.
The fake out death with Aragorn was really not needed. I don't really know why they did that.
It's a criticism of the trilogy as a whole. It's one of the few criticisms I think that can be levied against it. The fact that we have so many fake outs. Some of them are obviously part of the story, Gandalf being the prime example. But yeah, we do get a lot of people saying, "Oh, they're dead." Oh, wait, no, they're not. Throughout it, and it's never been something that like bugs me at all. But it is a valid critique. They do have it a lot here.
If you take it out of it, it's kind of boring. Like I think that adds something to it. I think that adds a bit of a where am I in the movie here? Like where am I? Like an emotional sort of flow.
Yeah.
There's an incredible period of stasis if you just take that out, because
I completely agree.
That's after stuff of like the funny stuff of like she can't cook and she gives him that horrible soup, and and he reveals, this is I think an extended bit.
It is,
where he talks about his
87,
his real age. Yes. But it's all good stuff. I like all that, but I think if you don't have the fake out death, it's just kind of we're on our way to some keep to have our last stand.
I completely agree with it. If it had just been the one, it's fine, but because it comes back again later on as a kind of a thing that keeps happening, I mean, it makes this one stand out more than it would have done in isolation.
That throws it off. And I will say this: I do like how that tees up the scene with Arwen and him and
yes, it's a good method for that.
Like that's fantastic. I love that sequence, the ethereal nature, giving her some agency and her helping him, come back to himself. That's all well and good. It's just, again, I would have placed that somewhere else and with not as much fake out deaths beforehand. That's kind of my main criticism of it. And also, like when he finally gets back to Helm's Deep and Gimli's like, "You are the luckiest man." Like that's fantastic. The emotions in John Rhys Davies' performance in that really shine through, and I appreciate that.
It's touching and humorous at the same time, which is hard to do, and particularly in a kind of tonal position of the story that the start of
which isn't always the case with Gimli. So again,
exactly. It's hard to capture that within that space of Helm's Deep as well. It's a very miserable and dread-filled place at this stage. But yeah, I agree with you there, Matt. In terms of like offering dynamism to the plot and giving us some breathing space away from the stagnancy of just having they go from one place to another place and wait. I completely agree there needed to be something there, and I don't have an issue with this particular case of it. It's just the fact that the whole trilogy as a whole has a lot of them in it. So having it been this one, I can see why people
I'm
are.
tired, by the way. I'm kind of out of it, so you know,
Okay.
No,
my
it's
brain's
fine.
a little
It's
slower
fine.
than it
I just
normally is.
talked about all this at this point, and we haven't even mentioned Faramir.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
I was gonna say that.
How have we gone through this and not even mentioned him? Because he's awesome.
Because we've been through all the minutia of all the stuff that I just don't care about as much. Like I just don't, you know. But which is all the Helm's Deep stuff, the point of it. But I like the Hobbit stuff, and I like them. Well, okay. Not to disagree with what you just said, but Faramir is my least favorite part of it. But I like the Hobbit's journey better. I don't have a problem with Faramir. I just have comparatively little interest in him compared to the Hobbits. But
and that's after he's been emboldened from what the position he was as a character in the book as well, because
in the book
he's paragon. I understand what they're trying to do with him, but yeah, he's paragon, like beyond high elven levels of purity. I mean, he's the guy who looks at the ring, goes, I would not pick it up and lay by the wayside.
Yeah,
you know,
it's like, what's the point of the story, Tolkien? Like,
yeah, the ring. If the ring isn't affecting someone like Faramir,
he's definitely an example of a character who I think is better in the films. They give him a lot more age. I really do like that flashback with him, his father, and Boromir.
I'm sorry, Denethor. I didn't mean to interrupt, but Denethor is comically dickish to Faramir.
Best character.
Do not speak to me of Faramir. I know his uses and they are few. It's like, he's right there. You know he's right there. What can I say?
No, that is the best character. I love how like they can hear him coming through the crowd and their faces just sink. They're just like, oh,
can he not give us a moment?
The character acting is very well done. But I think the dynamic between the three of them, like it's pretty stereotypical. I will say this, like you instantly know like where each of these people are and what they stand for. But I also think it helps that we've had a whole movie to get to know Boromir at this point too. So the fact that we're seeing him again, but from this perspective, I think kind of helps with that. Again, I like Faramir's whole arc. I think is definitely, it's definitely better in the third movie, but I really like a lot of the setup they do for this. And I agree with you, Matt. In the books, he's way more cut and dry. Yeah. Compared to this, this is why I actually prefer the movie version of him more, because he's actually a bit more well-rounded, and it's also a good way of juxtaposing the temptation that he experiences to what Boromir experienced previously, and how Frodo is kind of instinctually, considering what happened with Boromir, what almost happened. I really like the it's twofold. I like the fact that he doesn't initially trust him for that reason, but also the fact that he uses Boromir's experience from the previous movie to help his brother. Like, this is what your brother almost did. Don't go down this path. And he gets that because with that flashback sequence we saw earlier, we see that he really, he obviously really loves his brother, respected what he stood for. And we also get a sequence where he discovers his brother's body, which I honestly is pretty hardcore, and all that. So I really like a lot of what they do with him, even though you can kind of see from a mile away where it's all going to eventually lead to. But, just because something is archetypal doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And I think that's kind of where he stands for me.
And he's one of the characters
that was a bit of a long-winded rant.
No. It was perfect encapsulation. Yeah, and it's the thing for me as well is that he's one of the characters who suffers the most from book the structural nature of the book that Tolkien chose to make right. Because we sit with him and his interrogation of Frodo for so long. And he is the character he is in the book in terms of being this paragon human and not really flawed in the way that he's intentionally made in the film. He just like you, Matt, said, Matt, he is just boring. But at the same time, while way better in the films, I still agree that he's probably the least interesting part of the dynamic of the group at that stage.
His best scene by far is when the dad just straight up tells him the wrong one died. Like, I mean, it's not because of the writing per se. It's the act. Like, that's why I give the actor
for sure,
David. What's his name? I forget his name, but the guy who plays Faramir, he's wonderful. He's a wonderful actor. But I mean, he sells most of that just with his face, and he just looks so crushed in that scene. And that's in the third one, so we'll get to that. Yeah, well, of course. But I just mean it's wonderful. But that's the closest I ever have ever felt to anything Faramir. He's a fine character in the movie. I like him a lot in the movie.
By the way,
David, what was that? What was it?
When
it broke up for me. Wenham?
Sorry.
Okay.
I believe that's how you say it.
I've seen him in a few things over the years, but I knew his first name was David something. But anyway, great actor. He was in things like that Van Helsing movie from a while back where he was like the lame character. He was the comic relief, the Friar Tuck kind of character. He was in the 300.
Oh yeah,
that was yeah. But
he also looks close enough to Sean Bean where you could actually kind of buy them being brothers.
Yes, yeah, another great piece of casting. Yeah, exactly. Very well.
But I also like the one thing I do like about Faramir, and you already spoke to it with him posing the threat to the ring and Frodo kind of helping him through the emotional catharsis of that. But I like the fact that he shows up when Gollum's at his least dangerous. It's kind of like a reset for that. So it's a nice bit of added stirring of the pot, kind of it could have gone maybe another way, because there is a wonderful scene in the book, and I can't remember which book it is because the films do
splice it differently,
in different spots, but there is a scene that Tolkien wrote that is maybe my favorite Gollum scene. It's the one where he is watching them sleep, and he almost it's like he almost like it's like he's trying to touch Frodo as kind of like a almost like a hug or a pat or just a familial thing, kind of a thing. And Sam wakes up at the wrong moment and sees him doing that, thinking he's going for the ring, and he's mean to him. And that's kind of where there's a version of it in the movie, but it's not as strong. It's not as profound, and it's almost in my memory, the way that it's written is kind of like that omniscient perspective where if it's anyone's perspective, it's Gollum's. So it's a sincere reaction of like he's almost beating it. He's almost beating the ring, and he's almost like back to being like a hobbit, like somebody who can really come back to as far back as he can go to being like a real hobbit again. And Sam wakes up at the wrong moment and is mean to him. Is the only character Sam is mean to. You know what I mean? So it's
which is kind of an expression of his own purity as well. I like that. It's the downside to the lack of, I don't want to say lack of nuance as a whole as a character, because he's a very nuanced character, but in terms of his personality, he's a more earnest, a more wear his heart on the sleeve, that kind of pure. So he's in terms of how he deals with creatures like Gollum, that's kind of the worst manifestation of it.
He's right about Gollum, but also in that moment he was wrong.
Yeah,
like that's the thing. Like, in general, he's right. In that moment, he was wrong, and as it's written, you see it as like a tragic moment where Gollum really maybe could have come back, and Sam didn't give him the chance. So
and
nice.
we of course like earlier we get that I'd say somewhat fairly iconic sequence of the two sides, Smeagol and Gollum, arguing essentially, and him kind of sending Gollum away, unfortunately temporarily, but it's again that first of all, I mean, all the credit to Andy Serkis's acting abilities for that, because the differentiation between the two sides going back and forth, that's not easy for anybody to do. So the fact that he was able to pull it off in the way that he did is really, really well done. So I really, again, all the credit in the world to him for that, because again, the amount of people who could probably pull that off effectively at the time is pretty slim. So that's fantastic.
And the very simple but essential choice to have the cut from perspective as well. So it looks like he's having a conversation across the way. It's not just doing something comical with the change. It really works. It's amazing how you just kind of accept it. You just accept it. It's not having a conversation with himself, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's just cutting backwards and forth between different head turns or anything. It falls very naturally, even though it clearly isn't.
And the fact that both versions of him have like very distinct body language and posture, and the way that they're kind of moving in that sequence too,
and the voice
further helps to differentiate more than just the voices, speech pattern.
For sure.
It kind of runs the gamut though as a scene, like just with the mood, because it's kind of funny at a start, and then it gets really not funny at all, and you feel terrible for him. Like it's not just that it's scary; it's that it's cruel. Like he's like his own mental abuser,
But then he gets that victory at the end as well, which helps kind of reel you in as like, oh, we're
like the weight is off his shoulders,
And he's still kind of a foul thing who wants to tear at strips of raw rabbit, and all that, but he's earnest, like in trying to be good, but it's as good as he can be. And that's like the great, scene of a verbs and stewed rabbit. It's one of my favorite chapter titles. I want to talk about that chapter someday. It's one of my favorite bits of the book. I mean, it's pretty faithful. to what happened there, but with like and the potatoes, like the potato
it becomes a meme instead. Yeah.
Oh goodness. But yeah, that and that leads us all to stuff with like Faramir and all that, which we've already kind of discussed. And again, I think the main point, and I agree with everything you guys have been saying. Faramir definitely works best when he has other people to work off of. As he is, he's just kind of a fairly typical archetype if done well. So that's all I really have to say about that.
The only thing I would add on top of that, sorry, is the just as a small thing that's quite impressive, the number of locations for this film may be the most we get, I think, potentially across the three, in terms of the scale of what the small scenes you're getting as you break through it, because you have the obviously introduction of Rohan as the big thing for this one, but also we do get a hefty amount of time spent in Osgiliath, which is important for kind of leading the kind of turning the camera Gondorwards for the third film. So having that kind of that established in this one and having it be the backdrop to the setting of Faramir and all the relevance there, and it's effective as not only that cinematically, but also as a stepping stone, touchstone to where Frodo and Sam are in their journey as well. I like how it handles that.
Found this always just felt like the more interesting stuff to me. We didn't talk about it, but like the stuff through the Dead Marshes, I think is like just so cool, and obviously, clearly drawn from his own experience as the author, like
in the trenches.
So obviously, like there is something about the fact that they make a point of showing dead elves, but he would have been next to dead young men, like that's what war is. It's dead young men typically, and so an elf obviously might be old, but it looks like it's still got its whole life ahead, and effectively it does because they're immortal, right?
And that one they choose to show as well. They make that deliberate choice that way,
And then and obviously you have like the Black Riders riding over, kind of like the specter of death.
That's so cool. I think it's on the horse, and it's on the
exactly that fake out of it being just the classic shot, and then it goes to the gauntlets and then zooms out with the flapping of the fell beast. Very cool.
Looking literally the Grim Reaper overhead, which again, more symbolism with that. That also obviously comes up later when the Black Riders attack, and Frodo almost gets confronted by one. Again, I really do like the tension in that sequence, even though it's kind of a fairly brief battle. Again, I mean, obviously, if you're gonna build up any sort of fear-based setting, Black Riders are some of your best bet, because just
that screech, that screech is incredible. The sound, I mean, of all the sound choices in the trilogy, of which there are many amazing ones. I mean, they're all are, but that screech is probably the most singularly effective in selling the character it's supposed to represent. Like, you don't need to know anything about the Black Riders. You don't even have to see them. If you hear that, you just play that to someone who knows nothing about the Lord of the Rings. They're gonna find that like hair-curlingly creepy. They're just gonna feel it feels wrong. And very intentionally.
Also, again, helped by the uniqueness of the music. The swelling orchestral sort of thing. The fact that their theme in particular sounds so different. And to your point, Callan, like when you really think about not just this movie, but in the trilogy as a whole, like how many times do any of the Black Riders speak, like at all?
Yeah,
in a manner that you can actually understand. Very little, that it helps sell that ethereal nature. Obviously, with the Witch King, he gets, a couple of lines in the next film, but even then, it's pretty sparse all the way through. So again,
before that, it's basically just give us the halfling she-elf, and Shire Baggins, etc. It's very minimal, but you don't need it to be any more than that. They are, I mean, more than most characters of the type, they are their presence alone. Just to
they're
be
much
there
cooler and
screeching.
explained. Like, I don't even know how much of what we get of their backstories is official, because of the way that the Tolkien mythos is sort of cobbled together piecemeal over many works. I don't know how much of it is his say and how much is guesswork and how much is just kind of harmless blah. They're much cooler as just nameless kind of threats. The more you tell me about them, the less I like them. I like they're a powerful idea, these things that like we're kings and are now slaves, like ghost slaves kind of a thing. It's really, really cool. Love it.
Also helped by Gollum's line of like, no, you can't kill them, like we just have to hide.
Can't kill them. No, yeah, exactly. And also
not technically, which by the way, not technically true, but he wouldn't know that. So
but also he delivers the line, "Rifts on wings" as they're flying. Like that's a comical line, and it doesn't affect the tone. Like, how is that done? That's really powerful.
I think he says that. I think he says it in the book. I'd have to check, but I think he does say that or something of the kind.
Perhaps then I don't recall on that one, but yeah,
he sold it really well.
It's impressive how he can deliver that, even with a almost intentionally comical delivery, because it's Gollum and it's a squeaky voice. But they're with it flying overhead, and it's still feeling like they're actually terrified, and they're holding the with the ring influence and Sam intervening, etc. Very cool.
The fact that they just barely get out of there, and once Faramir lets them go. We also get obviously some foreshadowing for Shelob later in the next film with Gollum leading.
I love the scene where Faramir lets them go though. I love that he I love that he was just gonna let them go, and the more he figured out about kind of where they were going, he's like,
wait, one second, grabs him and slams him again. It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Yeah, exactly. Because and also the fact that, again, it's a small thing, but he's the learned one. He's the one who's spent time with Gandalf. He's the one who's been in the archives, reading things up for the hell of it. He's the one who's obsessed with the old times of Numenor and the greatness, etc. He's the historian. He's the nerd of the brothers. So I like that he knows that. Not many people would. It's particularly that pass in specific, the Cirith Ungol as a whole concept, Minas Morgul, etc. That's fine, but the fact that he knows about the past and the treachery of it, it helps sell him. And obviously, he's the one who tells Gandalf and delivers that line later in the film. But also, one of the big touchstones of this climax for the Hobbit side of the equation is Sam and his for answering of the question, what are we fighting for? What are we fighting for? Sam. Written by Philippa Boyens, and one of the best things of the entire trilogy, if you ask me. It's not even a Tolkien line. He's not even Tolkien's speech.
Well, I mean, I would have called it Sam's best moment, except it's not, because he carries Frodo out there.
Exactly, But I can carry you.
Again, we keep saying everything in this movie is amazing.
Exactly. It's how do you pick
what you're comparing it to? I mean,
but at the same time, this is real. This is a storybook moment. This is a piece you could take and you could put it into any dark moment of any story event. I mean, real life for that matter. There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, but it's worth fighting for. That is such a clever answer to the question, because I mean it's talked about in behind the scenes stuff. She sat down and thought, what are we fighting for? How do we go on? How do I answer that question without it being cheap or cheesy? It's extremely powerful language choice for giving everything you need to know as a listener hearing it. Yes, you're right. There is some good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. It's the same energy, very different tone, very different delivery, obviously, but it's the same energy as Gandalf in the Hobbit films, with why the halfling, why the Hobbit. And it's the small things.
Keep talking about these. You're gonna make us talk about these someday.
Hey, if we don't do a Fanalysis on the Hobbit films, I'm never watching them again. So at least it will give me one more watch of them.
Well, I mean, I'm willing to talk about them. I definitely
the first one. The first one is fine.
It
has some drawbacks, but I tried just for its own sake to watch the whole trilogy. I just can't get through it all uninterrupted.
It's painful, but we'll have a lot more to say of interest, at least, about those three. So it's not just be a constant. Oh, how amazing is it? How amazing is this? How amazing is that? As we're doing for these films, but I don't care. It's good fun. But yeah, it's the same energy though. That kind of the Tolkien spirit of everyday common folk doing small pieces of good that adds up. That's the spirit he's trying to infuse the story with, as the kind of combative cure-all to the dark times that he lived through and saw coming, etc., which is pretty poignant for the modern age, and particularly the last few years. But I like it. It resonates with me, and Sam being the one to deliver it, of course, in that moment is it's a perfect choice. It had to be Sam or Gandalf.
Really, and I love the trigger point of it being Frodo saying he can't do this. I can't do this, Sam. Just because that's a really tough spot to be. I haven't had that many moments in my life, but I've had moments where I thought I can't do this, and it's really tough. If you actually believe that, it definitely helps to have a Sam or at least someone else to help you shoulder the burden.
And the fact that's that personal struggle tied into the external of the ring. The ring's doing it, but it doesn't matter. It could just be himself struggling with their quest that has nothing to do with a magical burden being carried.
In the end, Frodo does kind of fail.
For sure. I like how
the weight upon him of the situation does really drag down. I mean, he suffered. I mean, again, we'll get more into this when we get into the third movie, but everything he goes throughout this entire trilogy affects him for the rest of his life in more ways than one. And
I love that about the ending.
leads to him making the decisions he does, and the fact that he really was diminished, well, both strengthened and diminished by this adventure overall. I mean, it shows that even if you're going through this and trying to do what is objectively a noble deed, it's not without consequence, which is again a really strong, it's a truism of real life. And again, that's something Tolkien also very clearly understood, given his history as well, no matter how he interpreted it.
Exactly.
And how you can interpret it nowadays too. Again, it's one of the literary sort of elements of this story as a whole that could be taken for any generation, which again, fantastic.
All he wanted was a little adventure like his uncle, or like his like
It all
Bilbo.
started as just a fun
He's
little
like, I
thing,
just wanted to go on a nice fun little adventure, and it's like my own adventure turned out to be quite different. Yeah, you don't know the half of it at that point, Frodo. Bless him.
I
But
don't know if we talked about this last time, but that's why I like the dynamic of them being like age peers in this version of the story a lot, because in the book Frodo's like 50 odd and Sam's like
a little bit
young
younger, yeah, 34,
squire
something like that.
kind of a yeah. It just feels very kind of master servant, which it is. It was like a sort of a class driven sort of society, and it was fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just like this much better, where it just feels like they're friends, and I just like that. It just feels like
it fits and it works nicely in the modern context as well, because obviously when it was written there was much more of that class structure, in the fact that Tolkien was seeing, particularly in that war, that was one of the things that tore down what was the class structure and made it the modern version of itself more than anything else. And he was kind of playing into that, the fact that the higher class, quote unquote, individuals were being carried by the batsmen who were doing the grunt work, etc. There was a big leveling of the playing field on a very personal level at that point in history, and that's represented in the relationship. But in the modern context, it doesn't quite gel as well. It's not as universal. It's not as relatable across the ages. It's quite the same as everything else. So I agree. I like the fact that's changed for the films myself as well.
Does anyone have anything else to say about the climax for like the Hobbit side of the story? Because we can kind of wrap up into the last bits, because really all we have left at this point is we have the Helms Deep battle, which we've already kind of talked about a bit, and obviously the beginnings of the fall of Isengard with the Ents going to war and all that.
Yeah. On the Hobbit side, the last thing I would say is that the music as the wrap up to the film, when it's kind of Gollum's come up with his plot and is like, come along, hobbits, come along. That sinister kind of tune out is a really clever and powerful way to finish the film, given the climactic kind of celebration we've had before. Like, the big victory of Helm's Deep that's not what we end on. That's not the note we end on. The note we end on is that sinister times are to come. There's still dread.
That's about to get real.
Yeah, it's very cool.
It's a good way of teeing up
as he's walking away,
without being overdone.
It's really cool how like they're in concert again, like after being like calling him murderer and getting inside of his head and go away, leave now, never come back, and now it's like, oh yeah, we got a plan. It's like kind of like that whole we can't do it, like we could let her do it. Yes, like
and it's the expression as well when he's like, it's like full on like. I love it. The beautiful work.
It's so cheeseball. I love it. It's perfect. I love it absolutely. But anyway, on the Helm's Deep side of things, I really don't have anything to say. We've
talked so much about it. I mean, already it's not bad. It's a fantastic siege. I love the details of them. Like they don't have enough people because Éomer's been exiled, so they have to draft either the oldest or the youngest that they have. I love Gimli's
the build-up is the best part of it. The build-up is better than the actual. I mean, the battle gets a little goofy with like racing down with shields or whatever.
That's a little
the legless moment.
Things of that kind.
I love the line. Most of these people have seen too many winters, and then Legolas comes in, or too few. Again,
love it.
That's a really good scene. Well. Gandalf obviously not being around because he has to go convince Éomer to help out, which he does later, which is all well and good. One thing I will say, just the little things, like when all the orcs and the Uruk-hai, come in and they're like slamming the ground with their weapons, and it cuts to the people underground and they could hear the echo. Like that's terrifying, and it's like literally death is just above you, and you really feel the dread the people of Rohan. And I think, again, that's why I think this is my favorite, just battle in the trilogy, because the emotionality and the tone. I mean, the fact that it takes place at night, you have like that sort of blue corona thing over the whole thing. It looks fantastic. You have the elves coming in, which is a good way of teeing up some of the stuff that happened in the previous movie, them coming together. Famously, Arwen was actually supposed to be here, but they ended up cutting
thank
her
God.
involvement
That would have been
in the
too
battle.
much. For that
Yeah, which I've always, I mean, I've always been kind of like whatever about that. That doesn't bother me or annoy me. It's just it is what it is. I think it's fine as it is. But again, what
I'm
I
just
think
glad she got what she got in the first one, because I love that.
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
for sure. That was awesome.
Glorfindel.
I
Yeah,
love that as well.
I
Well, we talked about it
Arwen
last time.
personally.
I'd not forgotten, but that was the thing that always comes as a surprise to me. That horse chase is just cinematically fantastic. I love that moment.
It's the most fantastical thing outside of Gandalf v. the Balrog.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. It's
the
gloriously
most,
done.
It's so
yeah.
great.
Water
But
coming in and sweeping away.
It would have been too much to have her there for Helm's Deep, though, because it would have bogged down the blocking of it. You would have had to spend too much time to justify her presence to not weigh down the climax of the film with the main characters and the focus being on Theoden and Rohan, etc. That's the reason I'm not a fan of it. But the people talk about the elves turning up as a problem. I completely disagree with that. I think the elves turning up is a fantastic tie into the theming of the story and the connection to the old, like you said, Evan, the men and elves, the last alliance is kind of that last glimmer of their presence.
It's like a little mini last alliance, right then and there, which is great.
It
so
helps.
I love it. It also just objectively gives them a fighting chance of actually surviving.
Well, yeah, exactly. And also it helps tie to things we've seen before. The elves are present. Why people will be questioning why the hell the elves aren't getting involved. People question that even with the elves happening in Helm's Deep. Yes, there are fighting up in the north, but the film doesn't cover that. So this helps bring it all together, explain why we spent so much time in Lorien and Rivendell, and it helps make it relevant more.
Like I like again little details like Aragorn commanding the archers to shoot while in Elvish, and then immediately speaking. I guess. I don't know. What do they call English in Tolkien? I don't know. Just
I don't know. Common.
Is there a name for that?
Western.
I don't know.
Western. Or is that? I don't know.
What? I don't know. Because for example, in Star Wars they call it basic.
Yeah.
No, we know what you mean. I just don't know the answer to the question.
But then he immediately switches to that to command the help command the the Rohirrim soldiers. That again, little world building touches like that, I appreciate. Sorry, just going into that. Sorry, Matt, didn't mean to cut you off there.
Well, all I was going to say is you could say it at any point. But these movies outside of Boromir, it's been pointed out, the main characters don't really die. And so and that's not a problem. That isn't a flaw. But it means that when you have a battle sequence in which none of the main characters die, you don't have the same presence of like stakes that you would typically expect in an epic like this.
That sense of peril.
So I personally don't care about the character of Haldir that much, but the idea of a dead elf like for a cause like this is a powerful idea. So I don't have attachment to him. The imagery itself, the idea is resonant enough. So you have to have some kind of something being lost and sacrificed here for it to really resonate. And these movies. It's not a cheat. I don't have a problem with the fact that the hobbits don't die or that, Aragorn's not dead at the end of it. That's not a problem. And Gandalf is effectively resurrected, but he wasn't mortal to begin with. You know what I mean? So, which I definitely didn't understand as a kid. I don't know if I said that last time.
It's just not relevant. It's just not relevant to the story at hand. It's back set dressing.
The fact he's an angel was something I didn't understand until well after all three movies had come out, and I'm very much not a Tolkien purist at all. Like of the three of us, I have the least involvement in his work. Nothing against him. It's just I don't know so much about it. I don't gravitate toward it. But it's just I like the choice to have the elves for that reason, because it's just something was lost. It's not just dead kids and old people, and it's not just this society on its last legs. It's somebody coming to help is also like laying it down and giving something that can't be gotten back. Although elves can come back, but you know what I mean.
But we don't know that in the films as well, so it still works. Cinematically, it works that way,
And him being someone we met in the previous film, albeit briefly, it's like, oh, I remember him. Like it for what it is. It does at least give that familiarity, which is all well and good. But
it was an excellent storytelling choice. Again, we talked about it at the very start, but the blocking of the siege itself, phenomenal. That, like you said, the cinematic choices, goofiness aside, and I do agree that's present, particularly with the Legolas aspects. But even things like
counting off their kills.
Yeah, and the humor.
Gimli doesn't bother me. Like even Gimli can't see.
I love that moment.
I love that. Like, that's so great. But like, it's literally it's the physical stuff where it's a bit too much, like for me after a point, like with the surfing the shield.
Yeah, that's the most egregious example for sure. Yeah. It's not reaching the Hobbit levels where it's subjectively terrible, but it's at the same time I get why it pushes the boundaries of
it's a scene like that next to the, like Aragorn's desperation of shoot him down, like shoot him,
exactly.
like stop him, like kind of that crossed with it's just a little like,
exactly. But having said that, holistically I completely agree, but having said that, within that accepting that as a necessary choice if you're going to make it work, I think they did it as well as they could do. The timings of it wasn't like an immediate contrast where he does that straight afterwards or anything. You feel the ebb and flow, particularly with the cutaways to the Treebeard and everything.
Like,
but I do agree. I do agree overall that is absolutely a critique of the fact, given how much work has gone into establishing this as being this dreadful, terrifying experience. It takes steps away from that. Arguably to its credit in some ways, but I didn't like the shield thing, for example. As a kid, of course, it's awesome. You just like, that's really cool.
It's fun to see as a kid.
As an adult,
as a kid, and then you also look at it now. It's just but
you also get things like the obviously Aragorn tossing Gimli into that line of orcs that door.
Don't tell the elf. It's the best part of that.
It is just like conceptually it's totally fine. I have no real problem with it. I think there's something about the visual of he's literally like tossing a bowling ball over there and just like they're all just spiraling and don't know how to deal with it. It's just kind of,
and also the immediate follow-up to it when the fact that it buys them about 10 seconds in shot, and obviously it's representing more, but from what we see, that whole deal buys them about 10 seconds of the gate being closed again.
I mean, in this situation, every second counts. And I also do like before they actually they jump into them, I do like the fact that Gimli is like so confident that just him and Aragorn take this
come on, we could take them
like just by themselves. I mean, I love that, and it shows that these two really definitely like the whole brothers in arms thing. That's all great, but
and the fact that Aragorn agrees, because all he does is goes, "It's a long way," it's like, I'm not sure you could make the jump. That's my issue. We can take hundreds of them, but it is weird how that works.
Trying to make him say it, like trying to make him like say, okay, do it then.
Exactly. It's brilliant. But the other thing as well is, aside from all of that exceptional blocking out of like start to finish of the pacing, everything, like it's what you said, Matt, earlier, that I didn't want to gloss over too much, was it is all in the build up. It's the stage setting ahead of the time. The fact that we spend so much time establishing the physical setting of the siege, the keep. We know where everything is. We know what's at stake, where the characters are being hidden away. We know the levels of pressure, so that when we get through the gate, when we get through the wall, we know what it means. It's not just a wall's broken. That wall's broken. Okay, that means we've only got like 2 barriers left. It visually gives you that placement for general storytelling within a siege context. But on top of that, we know who's present. We know the characters. We know Eowyn and her wish to fight but not being able to. The fact that she's now hidden in the crystal caves and having to like look after all these faces that we're cutting to in the lead up to. While you said before, Evan, the shield smashing and stamping of the Uruk-hai. They spend so much time establishing the emotional stakes here that on top of the fantastic blocking and actual action of the siege, we care. Even if they'd messed everything up on the action side, we care about what's happening ahead of time. It's so important for that, because we would not care about the siege if we didn't have that groundwork. And on top of that, specifically because I mentioned about Theoden earlier, this is where we see him push back on Aragorn a bit and actually get a point score. I love the moment on the wall when he's saying, when he turns about to shut Aragorn up, as Aragorn's like, they're not here to steal our farm, they're here to kill you all. And he's like, look at my men. So their courage hangs by a thread. I love that lesson. Like, Aragorn hasn't quite, he was thinking of it in terms of like the practical, theoretical, the kind of elven above it all kind of way. And Theoden's like, yeah, I know all of that. Telling everybody is not helping here. It shows you that the responsibility and the experience that he has, that Aragorn has, is kind of lacking a little bit. Really cool little moment, particularly because we're going to spend most of the rest of the siege with Theoden despairing. He obviously has the tempting of fate with Saruman. He's like, is this it? Is this all you can conjure, Saruman? But when he's putting the armor on, when he's
that goes south real quick.
Yeah, just like 2 seconds later, he's like, oh. But when he's putting the armor on,
that's basically like Gollum, like making fun of Frodo with the cobwebs,
exactly. He's like,
he's gonna come and kill me.
Exactly. But the putting of the armor on, the kind of speech to Hamling, etc. Is it Hamling? Hammer. I don't know. One of the. I should know it.
Something
Gambling.
like that, yeah.
Gambling. I
Oh,
think.
the kid. Who cares? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, great idea of a character, but who cares about the name?
Yeah, exactly. But
anyway.
all this stuff. Hammer is the kid, but I think it's Gambling that is arming him. But Theoden, just letting us know who this character is, so that when he has that moment when Aragorn stokes the flames and gets that spirit up, so that they can charge out of the Hornburg, ride out and meet them. That is so crucial to this. It couldn't just be an action choice where, oh look, we the light's coming, we can go. It had to be he made that choice before Gandalf arrived. He made the choice to be the king, to ride for his people, to have that last stand.
Last stand,
and earned the saving. He earned the Deus Ex that came in. Not that it was that, but it was a victory before it was a victory.
Yeah. The scene of Gandalf and freaking Éomer on their horses, right, just weighing into that's always stuck in my head of them jumping in and just, oh, it's so cool. You got to admit, they definitely earned that moment.
Absolutely. And, did you ever play the game, the Return of the King video game? It's so good. That moment and the fighting on the walls, etc. It opens with that. It's crystallized. I love the whole setup of Helm's Deep and that's framing. But yeah, and the music as well.
This is also This is also just before we wrap up. We get the Ents going to war. I like that Merry and Pippin, the way that they sort of trick Treebeard into going. It's because it's obviously not done with malicious intent, but they can't think of any other way to get through to him in his sort of way fast enough. So the fact that they lead him to that, and he sees the devastation queued up from earlier, like we said, of him ripping out the forest, and Treebeard's like, okay. Now it's time. Now we're going to war. The March of the Ents all going in that's awesome. And the actual fight itself is great because obviously most of the Saruman's forces are at Helm's Deep right now, so he doesn't have as much defense. And it also just shows the power of the Ents and the fact that they're just weighing into these orcs, crushing them, throwing things that. That's all awesome.
Keyed up by Gandalf as well when he said they're about to wake up and remember that they are strong. Is the kind of
ripping down the dam too and having it all flood in
the river.
That's all great.
Brilliant.
They for some reason, I had forgotten about this, but earlier in that sequence, we see some orcs trying to light one of the Ents on fire, and then as all the water comes, that same Ent
dunks his head into it's funny that's what stands out.
You didn't need that, but
exactly.
For some reason, I remember it.
It's those details that make it so strong. They didn't just have a bunch of Ents just attacking things. It's all, I remember that Ent does this, that Ent does that. They've added character and made decisions with what these models are going to be doing.
Yeah. Also, Merry and Pippin once again demonstrating their incredible skill
lethal,
at throwing rocks.
Exactly, lethal rock throwing,
hitting them perfectly square in the face every single
with
time
enough force to knock them on their ass as well. It's hilarious. The Hobbits.
Treebeard even compliments their skills.
Fine. Yeah, exactly. I love it. And so, and also, crucially, it was Pippin's idea as well. It's one of the few. Yes. Or one of the original wins that Pippin gets, because usually he's the one screwing everything up, with his bungling. So that was a nice win for him to get them be the one who's kind of architected this. And the March of the Ents as well. The music that was them marching down the hill, beautiful.
Yeah, and the sphere on Saruman's face as he's seeing his Isengard just go. Well, I was gonna say go up in flames, but it's kind of the opposite. Get washed.
Yeah.
Get washed away with the Ends. It's
the filth is washing away
is the line. This is all fantastic. He doesn't have any dialogue, but he doesn't need to. So that's all well and good. And
then that's the last time you see him in the theatrical version.
Yep. It's that's it. It's him looking after, and he closes the door, and that's it. Yeah. That's he's gone.
I can't remember how it goes, but in Return of the King, somebody makes a reference to Saruman's at Isengard still, and there Saruman must remain.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous. I'm sure we'll say a lot about that when we get to it. But yeah, that's kind of the wrap up. Gandalf arrives with Éomer, like I said. They win the Battle of Helm's Deep. The Ents destroy Isengard. We already mentioned Frodo and Sam's wrap up. Does anyone else have anything else they want to discuss?
On that, one of the additions in the extended edition, it's one of the few that I would have personally left out, is we have time spent on them as they're chasing the Uruk-hai away. They run into a suddenly appearing forest. I found that to me that muddied the waters a bit where it didn't need to. That was something I would have cut even from the extended personally. The fact that the forest had followed out all the way to Helm's Deep. One of the weaker choices, I think.
And basically just eats the orcs that go into it.
Yeah, it's not a big deal at all. It really doesn't matter that much, but it muddies the waters of Helm's Deep as a specific sequence and set of the film, but also it raises questions like, well, why can't they just march the forest everywhere and have it be an army of itself? All the little background things. It makes it a bit less clean. I prefer the victory of nature over the industry to be localized with the Ents in the Isengard itself. I don't like it being the forest is spreading. It seems a bit too much, too fantasy for me within the Tolkien setting.
That's all good, and I obviously Gandalf, kind of partially closes, our fates lie in the hands of two hobbits now. That's all well and good. We already talked about
for Helm's Deep is over. The battle for Middle Earth is about to begin. It's like cuts back to the hobbits.
Great setup. Yeah, we already talked about the sequence with Sam and Frodo and Gollum and teeing up with Shelob and all that. Nice ominous note to end things. So yeah, I think that's Two Towers. Unless anyone has more they want to discuss.
I honestly, I don't feel like I have anything useful to contribute here. These are great movies and I love them. My one serious criticism is not a serious criticism. It's just there's not enough Gandalf in the picture.
Exactly.
Really I love it. That's it.
Yeah, it's an incredible piece, and like I said from the beginning, although I said it when I say that it doesn't stand up as well as its own film, that is only in comparison to the other two Lord of the Rings films. It very much stands up on its own as just a self-contained experience. It's not like you won't get anything out of watching this, because that is furthest from the truth possible. Everything that it does right, it absolutely nails. And like I said, the only reason it's number 3 is because something has to be. This is still a fantastic film with some of the best elements in the trilogy, in my opinion, whether it be musically, set piece, or the battles. There's definitely something in this for everyone. So yeah, definitely recommended if you can, if you're watching
if you somehow got to the end of this and also just in life generally haven't watched Lord of the Rings, what the hell are you on? Go and watch Lord of the Rings right now. Go and watch Two Towers. It's a hearty recommendation from us. But yeah, third is from me.
There's probably at least one very weird person like that. They won't
who loves listens to us for Star Wars and hasn't watched Lord of the Rings. Go and watch it right now. You owe it to yourself. It's hyped up as much as it is for a reason. But yeah, all thirded by me. Love the film. It's as good as we've made it out to be, as we've all the way through this. We've said everything we need to say.
I can't wait for the next one because I love Denethor. That's all I'm saying. I love Denethor so much.
Oh my god, Denethor! It's so hilariously over the top Shakespearean. It's brilliant.
Oh boy,
it's Gandalf's reflection off Denethor as well. I love it.
It's everything.
Oh good. It's a wild ride.
But yeah, that is for next time. This has been Fanalysis, The Two Towers, or our Fanalysis of The Two Towers. I hope you've enjoyed. I'm Callan, and I still don't have an outro.
This is Matt. Thanks for watching. See you next time, guys.
Evan Nova 95. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll see you guys later.
Goodbye.